Whenever I hear about another Souls-like game, my reaction is usually something like this. Despite my love for Dark Souls 3, Elden Ring, and especially Sekiro, one of my favorite games of all times, I don't really dig Souls-like subgenre. The secret formula found by From Software is more complicated to replicate than it seems, and every Souls-like I ever touched felt very similar on the surface, yet missed something, making the package not really that attractive. And when a studio developing new Souls-like has only one shitty game in portfolio, chances to get the decent game are smaller than chances that Russian hobo actually spending money on the food instead of the cheapest in the world booze. So it is fair to say I didn't go into this game with any expectations. More so, I was not planning to play this game at all. Positive review gave me a bit of curiosity, but this was not enough till I saw some high-skill players' boss fights. Immediately from the video, a game felt so smooth, so technical, so rewarding that I felt an irresistible urge to start playing myself. And man, I am glad I did it. While it is by no means a perfect game, it is a million times better than it has any right to be. Welcome to my recommendation list, and today's entry is a new Souls-like from round 8, Lies of P. You are playing as Pinocchio, puppet of Geppetto. You wake up on the train in Krat's central station. Krat, where the entire plot of the game happens, was a technologically advanced city thanks to puppets assisting humans in every aspect of their lives. But the dream was never to come true. Puppets' frenzy made old puppets turn against their masters, leaving only corpses and ruins behind. Meanwhile, there is incurable petrification disease slowly taking people's vision and turning them into stone. Government trying to stop the spread by isolating sick people, others are trying to take advantage by selling fake medicine. The church sees the plague as the punishment for people's sins. If this was not enough, Geppetto, your creator and father figure, is nowhere to be found. He is in grave danger since he is a designer of puppets, and naturally many survivors blame him for the events happening. Your mission is to save Geppetto, stop puppet frenzy, and uncover the truth behind petrification disease. Outstanding quality of the Lies of P story? Well, that it actually exists. In the spirit of mimicking From Software style, the majority of Souls-likes are trying to create a deep lore of the world and deliver pieces of it to the player through notes, short dialogues not connected to each other, item descriptions, etc. Leaving the story very basic and characters unmemorable. It is also quite convoluted and can't be understood without some videos on YouTube. This framework of storytelling in video games can be good in the right hands. It can decouple playable characters from the plot and create a feeling of actual role-playing inside the world of the game instead of fulfilling someone else's story. This is not an easy trick to pull though. From Software mastered it. However, when it comes to other studios, their world building starts falling apart and becomes just not very interesting. Round 8 did an amazing job by not following this route and created Lies of P as a linear, story-driven game. It has a relatable, fleshed-out set of characters with development arcs, plot-fitting monomyth structure with some twists along the way, and exploration of one of the favorite Eastern topics, concepts of life and consciousness. Well, because of course it is. Don't get me wrong, it is not top-tier writing some Sony exclusives deliver, like the first part of The Last of Us or God of War reboot. Villains are probably the weakest part with quite a shallow or unexplored motivation, but it is a good change of pace from games that require lore digging just to understand what the hell is going on. At the same time, Lies of P does not completely give up on the concept of lore sprinkled here and there. There are few notes that give you interesting insights about the world or about some of the characters you meet along the way. It is really nice to have, but if lore hunting is not your thing and you don't want to read all of this stuff, you still will be able to understand the main story. Round 8 went small on this one, delivering simple yet compelling story, colorful characters, exploration of timeless themes, and just enough world building, and they did it quite well. But Lies of P is a game, not a movie, so how does this gameplay hold up? Let's get to the juicy part. Is Lies of P combat any good? And the answer is yes. It is obviously not for everyone since it has this unforgiving difficulty that can't be changed and requires a get good attitude from the player. As in most of Souls-likes, combat in this game is leaning towards slow and methodical, requires player to understand the game and learn enemy patterns, rather than training crazy long combos juggling enemies in the air. This is what I call reactive gameplay, because most of the effort and energy of the player will be consumed by perfecting their reactions to the enemies instead of combat inputs. Dodge gives you some iframes. I heard some players comment that the amount of iframes is pretty low. However, I didn't feel like it was too bad. Then of course you have the block, and again, as you can expect, pressed with the right timing will parry the attack, or as the game calls it, perfect guard. Guarding, perfect or not, consumes stamina. If you don't hit the parry window, you will receive a portion of the damage, but will be given the opportunity to get some of HP back by attacking the enemy, similar to Bloodborne. Perfect guard, on the other hand, will block all the damage, and on top of that will damage enemies' weapon and posture. Unfortunately, none of those have any representations in the HUD or visual cue, showing your progress, so you have no way to tell how far are you from staggering the enemy or breaking their weapon. Breaking the weapon will reduce enemies' damage and reach. The second one can be quite significant. While I think this is a pretty cool feature, I found it quite useless throughout the game. There is no point in playing this high-risk, high-reward game against regular enemies because of how fast they die. It's just not worth it. On the other hand, there are elite enemies and bosses, and while parrying bosses is essential to have any sort of the clean fight, it is almost never about the weapon, simply because a lot of them don't have one. The other benefit of parry is extra stagger damage. In Lies of P, it is much more complicated compared to the games it used as inspiration. For example, dealing enough posture damage in Sekiro will completely immobilize them for a short period so the player can deal the fatal blow. Similarly, it works in another game inspired by Sekiro, Star Wars Fallen Order and Survivor. In Lies of P, after dealing enough stagger damage, the enemy is only marked as staggerable. To actually stagger them and open for a fatal attack, you need to deliver a successful charged heavy attack. Because staggerable window without buffs is not that long, you can imagine it promotes a lot of panic play, leading to taking damage instead of staggering the enemy. So to play effectively, you need to have a good balance between control to avoid situations like those and aggression to prevent stagger bar from depleting. On top of that, enemies have so-called fury attacks, which could be quite confusing at the beginning. In most of the games, when you see an enemy glowing red or any kind of red indicator, it usually means unblockable attack, so you need to dodge it. In Lies of P, it works a bit opposite. While you can't block fury attack, it also ignores frames of your dodge, which is kinda unique. The only reliable way to prevent damage is to hit the timing and parry it. It is interesting take, however, I can't emphasize how many times I screwed up because my reflexes were telling me red means dodge. While parry windows in these games are thinner than most provocative G-strings, attacks from bosses are very well telegraphed. So with enough of training, you can get fairly reliable parries. By the way, if you're interested in how to sort out your parries and get better, you can check out my God of War video. I will leave the link with timecode in the description. So I talked about defensive tools a lot. What about offensive ones? Well, there's not much. You have your basic light and heavy combos and charge heavy. Moveset is specific to weapon, or if more accurate, to weapon's handle. More about this in the arsenal section later. On top of that, each weapon has two Fable Arts, one defined by blade and one by handle. Fable Arts consumes Fable that can be restored either by attacking and parrying or by using consumables. Some of the Fable Arts finishes are considered charged attacks, so they can be used as an easier way to land a staggering hit against staggerable enemy. There's nothing groundbreaking in those mechanics, but the combination chosen by round 8 actually works really damn well in boss fights, making those tough but very rewarding experiences. But combat mechanics are nothing without good enemies and bosses, so what about those? As I was writing the script, I realized how little I care about regular enemies. Usually, combat against big groups of regular enemies in Souls-likes sucks. And unfortunately, Lies of P brought nothing to rectify this problem. No tools to help you with it, no way to boost poise. Camera and controls are absolutely not fit for such a scenario. Regular enemies are dying after just a few hits, making smaller encounters in most cases as challenging as racing motorcycle against push bike. Exceptions are elite enemies, kinda, but if you have a punchy build, can dispose of most of them with a few Fable attacks and arm uses. I really don't want to waste too much time here on regular enemies. It is standard, not very inspiring, Souls-like stuff. It is not representative of the quality of this game, but the bosses are. I enjoyed boss fights in Lies of P a lot. As I was doing my second playthrough, I was approaching every boss with anticipation of fun. And the best part, Lies of P has plenty on offer. I don't think Lies of P has a boss I will remember for a long time as one of the best, toughest, most rewarding bosses experiences, but the density of high quality bosses is insane. So what makes those bosses so good? In my opinion, round 8 struck a very good balance between challenging and fair. Bosses in this game by no means are easy. On your first playthrough, you probably will have to work for most of them. They have buttload of HP, multiple phases, and they hit like a truck. At the same time, the attacks are very well telegraphed, allowing the player enough time to identify the coming move pattern and choose the reaction. As I already mentioned, despite the extremely tiny parry windows, those long and distinct wind-ups allow you to hit those windows more often than you might anticipate. Some of the patterns might be long, but they are filled with consistent openings, so you won't be forced to play only defense waiting for this single opening in the entire moveset. Moveset is very diverse. There are faster attacks that are harder to parry, but they don't do a lot of damage, so you might consider safely blocking them and then trying to get your HP back. There are slower attacks that hit like an absolute truck, so you either dodge or parry. There are grapple attacks that can be only dodged, and of course fury attacks that can be only parried. All bosses are different enough, and none of them made me bored. But what about those offensive tools? Or do you kill bosses continuously repeating the same poke attack? Well, kinda. Your arsenal in Lies of P consists of weapons, prosthetic arm, and throwable items. Throwable items are throwable items, nothing to say there. Let's go into weapons. Every weapon in Lies of P has two elements, handle and blade, that you can mix and match. Blade is responsible for damage, type of damage, durability, and first Fable art. Whenever you upgrade your weapon, you upgrade the blade. So if you find a more interesting handle, you can try it out with your already buffed up blade. Handle in its turn is responsible for moveset, damage scaling, and second fable art. Game allows you to slightly change scaling using cranks. For example, if you are leveling up technique, local version of dexterity, and suddenly find interesting handle scaling B from motivity, local version of strength, and C from technique, using technique crank you can change it into C and B respectively, allowing for better usage of your high technique parameter. There are also special weapons you can buy using ergo from bosses. The only real difference is using different resources for upgrades, and that special weapon can't be disassembled into handle and blade. I found this approach very fun at the beginning and I played with it quite a lot. However, as soon as I found the perfect weapon for myself, about 70% into the first playthrough, I never came back to experimenting. It is still a massive step forward compared to Dark Souls or Elden Ring, where I take a weapon I found in the first 20% of the game and never change it, because I simply lack resources for upgrades. But what about those prosthetic arms? Are those useful at all? There are quite a few prosthetic arms. At the very beginning I used those quite extensively. I liked the flamer one, so I could easily apply burn effect to the enemies. However, closer to the end of first playthrough, it stopped dealing enough damage to bother using it to set enemies on fire. Till mid of my second playthrough, I pretty much ignored my arms abilities. But then I realized there are still some ways those can be very helpful, and it came back to my arsenal. Those arms are no big damage dealers on high levels, however, if you pay enough attention to what actual upgrades are offering, you might be surprised with the capability of those things. But what about level design? Is it interesting to explore? As with pretty much any other aspect of this game, developers took a safe approach here. I can't call the result great, but I think it is good. While Lies of P is a linear game and there are no interconnections and secret passages between the areas, every area in isolation is very well built. Single stargazer, or local bonfire, can be used throughout the entire area with a smart system of shortcuts you unlock as you progress through the area, making the game feel less of a single corridor. Areas have their own distinct design supported by different enemy types. Like when you are in a puppet factory, you face a lot of new freshly assembled puppets without any clothes or designs on them. When you get to the junkyard, you face damaged, partially broken puppets. As I said before, regular enemies are kinda all the same. You don't really have time to learn their different moves and patterns, so despite looking different, they all felt very similar to me, with very rare exceptions. But it is still a very nice touch, making things feel more immersive. Unfortunately, level design suffered from a number of old From Software patterns, so let's talk about those. Runs to the boss. I do not understand what is the reasoning behind long runs to the boss through the respawning enemies. Why? Why can't we have a checkpoint right in front of the boss? Don't get me wrong, it's nowhere near as bad as Dark Souls 2. The worst case is about half a minute run. I just don't understand why so many developers hang on to this concept. Weapons hitting walls and tight corridors. This is probably my biggest complaint about this game. I can't tell you how many times I died because the game forced me to fight in a tight corridor, and I simply couldn't swing my giant sword at all. Again, this was a case with From Software games, and I would guess it was an attempt to give a bit more realistic feeling, where the fight and close spaces require a different style, more point work. This more realistic feeling is simply ruining gaming experience. That's why in Elden Ring, the latest From Software game, While you still can hit the wall, I don't remember game placing me in a situation where I couldn't attack at all. And this game I also played with as Giant Sword. The last one are those platformer-like sections where you need to go over the very tiny log and enemies shooting you from every possible direction. I just don't think those are fun. I don't think the game has the right controls for it. Fortunately, there was only one truly annoying section like this in the game, so it is not a big deal. Despite those flaws, I don't think level design holds this game back. It is interesting enough and it looks pretty. But what about replayability and trophy hunting? There are two reasons why you might want to play Lies of P New Game Plus. First, obvious one, you want a trophy. Some of the items are available only on New Game Plus. Also, you need 2 distinct playthroughs where you choose different answers to unlock all endings, because 2 of the playthroughs are mutually exclusive from the very early game. If you're kinda casual about the trophies, I don't really think they worth it. There are no trophies leading to very surprising revelations or interesting bosses, with the exception of one that is available in 2 out of 3 endings. So I would recommend backing up after the final boss so you can make sure you are getting this extra fight. If you still want to go for platinum, be very careful on your second playthrough, where you technically want to clean up everything. I basically had to play through almost the entire game one more time because one missing dialogue. Though I didn't mind it too much, because another reason to go into NG Plus is if you liked combat, and I absolutely did. It was very nice to revisit all the bosses with good knowledge of them and their moves and deliver a much cleaner kill. For me, Lies of P is the game I enjoyed the most in 2023 so far. But it is not for everyone, and it is nowhere near a contender for the Game of the Year. What it is a very self-aware game, knowing what it needs to be, what its audience should be, and what it doesn't need to be, and what audience it shouldn't try to attract. Developers didn't try to create an open world game because it takes a lot of resources, so they delivered a quality linear game instead. Developers understood that they don't have writing resources to either deliver a Sony-level cinematic masterpiece or deep and interconnected and well-thought lore like From Software does. So they created a perfectly fine story with colorful characters. Developers didn't try to evolve or revolutionize Souls-like gameplay formula because they don't have enough experience. So they focused on delivering their take on this formula with the highest quality they could. Some people say they just stole a lot of stuff without introducing anything new, but I would say it's not a theft but very careful high-quality emulation. In the end of the day, I really enjoyed my time with Lies of P, and it takes its place in my recommendation list.